No, I can't take it anymore. She's always the perfect one. The job she has, the love she gets, the way people adore her. And now a husband too? No way. No way she gets to have it all. Why does it always have to be her? Why is she the one everyone loves? What about me? What about my life? It's not fair. She walks around like she's better than everyone, like she's some angel. Perfect Adeobi with her perfect life. Does anyone even notice me? Does anyone care about me? No, they don't. They never do. I'm invisible to everyone, even to her. But not today. Today she'll finally know. She'll feel what I felt all these years. She'll understand the pain, the jealousy, the loneliness. Oh, she'll know what it's like to lose. I'll make sure of it. Ends now. Everything ends today.
Adeobi and Chimamanda were sisters, born just 2 years apart. They grew up in the same house, shared the same meals, and even wore each other's clothes. But life has a funny way of treating people differently. Adeobi was the one everyone admired, the hardworking, God-fearing daughter who brought pride to her family. Chimamanda, on the other hand, was often overlooked, not because she lacked potential, but because Adeobi's light was too bright. The cracks started to show the day Adeobi graduated from university. The whole village gathered to celebrate her. The neighbors brought gifts, the elders prayed for her, and their parents could barely contain their joy. Chimamanda sat quietly in a corner, clapping along but with a heavy heart. She had never felt so invisible. Not long after, Adeobi landed a prestigious job in the city. The news spread like wildfire. Adeobi is a blessing to her family, people would say. God really favors her. Chimamanda heard it all. At first, she smiled and nodded along, but deep down, her envy began to grow. She hated feeling this way, but she couldn't help it. Every success Adeobi achieved felt like a personal failure. One evening, Adeobi came home from work, beaming with excitement. Chimamanda, she called out, her voice filled with joy. My boss is promoting me to team lead. Can you imagine? God has been so good to me. Chimamanda forced a smile. That's great news, Adeobi. You deserve it. But as soon as Adeobi walked away, Chimamanda's face fell. Why does it always have to be her? She thought. Why can't I have something to celebrate? From that moment, things began to change. Chimamanda avoided Adeobi as much as she could. She stopped asking about her day and pretended to be busy whenever Adeobi tried to talk to her. She couldn't stand hearing about another achievement, another blessing. But envy doesn't stay hidden for long. It grows and festers, turning even the smallest slights into unbearable wounds. Chimamanda didn't know it yet, but her feelings were leading her down a dangerous path. One that would change both their lives forever. As days turned into weeks, Chimamanda's feelings of jealousy grew stronger. At first, she tried to suppress them. After all, Adeobi was her sister, her own flesh and blood. But every time she saw Adeobi's smiling face or heard another person praising her, Chimamanda felt the bitterness rise in her chest like fire. Adeobi, on the other hand, was oblivious. She continued to share her victories with Chimamanda, thinking her sister was happy for her. Chimamanda, she said one evening while they were eating dinner, you won't believe what happened today. My boss asked me to represent the company at a big event in Lagos. This is such a huge opportunity. Chimamanda forced a smile as she spooned food into her mouth. That's wonderful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But inside, she was boiling. Lagos. A big event. Why does she get all these chances while I sit here in this house, forgotten by the world? As the days passed, Chimamanda's resentment began to affect her behavior. She avoided Adeobi as much as possible. When Adeobi tried to spend time with her, Chimamanda would make excuses. I'm tired, she'd say, or I have a headache. Adeobi noticed the change and was hurt by it, but she didn't know what to do. She thought maybe Chimamanda was going through her own struggles and decided to give her space. But Chimamanda didn't need space. She needed peace in her heart, and she didn't know how to find it. Her envy consumed her thoughts, keeping her awake at night. She began to imagine scenarios where Adeabi would fail, where people would stop praising her and finally notice Chimamanda instead. These thoughts scared her, but they also brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. One day, Adeabi brought home exciting news. "Chimamanda," she said, "I've been saving up, and I'm planning to buy Mama and Papa a new car. They've done so much for us, and I want to give back." Chimamanda couldn't believe what she was hearing. A new car. For their parents. It was like another slap in the face. She felt like she was drowning in her own inadequacy. That night, as Adeabi slept peacefully in her room, Chimamanda lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "She's making me look useless," she thought. "Everyone will compare us even more now." The turning point came on Adeabi's birthday. Their parents threw a small party for her, inviting a few close friends and neighbors. The house was filled with laughter and joy. Adeabi looked radiant in her new dress, and everyone took turns giving speeches about how proud they were of her. But Chimamanda sat in the corner, her face like stone. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up and said, "Happy birthday, Adeabi. I wish you all the best." Then she sat down without another word. The room fell silent for a moment, but Adeabi, always the peacemaker, quickly thanked her and moved on. The celebration continued, but Chimamanda's bitterness had left a shadow over the evening. After the party, Adeabi confronted Chimamanda. "What's wrong, Chimamanda? You've been so distant lately. Did I do something to upset you?" Chimamanda hesitated, torn between her guilt and her anger. Finally, she said, "It's nothing, Adeabi. I'm just tired." Adeabi looked at her sister with concern. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me. I'm here for you." But Chimamanda didn't want Adeabi's kindness. In her twisted mind, it felt like pity. "I said I'm fine," she snapped, walking away before Adeabi could say more. That night, Chimamanda made a decision. She couldn't keep living in her sister's shadow. She needed to do something to make herself stand out, to prove that she was just as important as Adeabi. But what she didn't realize was that her feelings were leading her toward a dangerous path, one that would soon spiral out of control. Chimamanda's jealousy had grown into something she could no longer control. It wasn't just envy anymore, it was hatred. She hated the way Adeabi walked into a room and lit it up. She hated how their parents always talked about her like she was the best thing that ever happened to them. And most of all, she hated how Adeabi didn't seem to notice the pain she was causing. One afternoon, while their parents were out, Adeabi and Chimamanda sat in the living room. Adeabi, as usual, was excitedly talking about her plans. "Chimamanda, I've started saving for my wedding. Even though I'm not engaged yet, I know God will bring the right man into my life soon." Chimamanda's heart clenched. Her fist tightened, and her jaw locked. Her wedding, she thought. Of course, it's always about her. She's already planning a wedding while I can't even find a man to look my way. She excused herself and went to her room, slamming the door behind her. As she sat on her bed, her mind raced with dark thoughts. "This has to stop," she thought. "I can't keep living like this. I need to make her feel what I feel." The next morning, Chimamanda went to visit a friend in the neighboring village. This friend, Amoka, was known for her quick temper and sharp tongue. Amoka had always been envious of Adeabi's success as well and often fueled Chimamanda's resentment. As they sat in Amoka's room, Chimamanda poured out her feelings. "I can't take it anymore, Amoka. Everyone loves Adeabi. My parents, the neighbors, even strangers. I'm just there, like I don't matter. Amoka leaned forward, her voice low. Chimamanda, if you keep letting her walk all over you, nothing will change. You need to stand up for yourself. Show her that you're not someone to be pushed aside. Chimamanda nodded, her mind already spinning with ideas. But how? She asked. How do I make her feel what I feel? Amoka smirked. Sometimes, people need to be taught a lesson the hard way. Back at home, Adebi was preparing for a family meeting. Their parents wanted to discuss Adebi's plans to buy them a new car. Chimamanda sat in the corner, listening but not saying a word. When their parents praised Adebi once again, something inside Chimamanda snapped. You know what? Chimamanda said, her voice louder than she intended. It's always about Adebi. She's the golden child, the perfect one. What about me? Don't I matter? Everyone turned to look at her, shocked. Adebi, confused, stood up. Chimamanda, what's wrong? Why are you saying this? What's wrong? Chimamanda shouted. I'll tell you what's wrong. I'm sick of living in your shadow. You get everything, jobs, praise, love, while I get nothing. Their parents tried to calm her down, but Chimamanda wasn't done. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Adebi, worried, followed her outside. Chimamanda, please talk to me, she pleaded. I don't want us to fight. You're my sister, and I love you. But Chimamanda didn't want to hear it. She turned to Adebi, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand what it's like to be me, Adebi. You have everything, and I have nothing. That night, as everyone slept, Chimamanda stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Amoka's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes, people need to be taught a lesson the hard way. She felt like she was drowning in her own emotions. She wanted Adebi to feel the same pain she had been carrying for years. Chimamanda got up from her bed and walked to the kitchen. Her heart was pounding, and her hands were trembling. She opened the cupboard and took out a small bottle of acid that their father used for cleaning metal. Holding it in her hands, she whispered to herself, this will end it. This will make her see what it feels like. Adebi's wedding day was the talk of the village. The house was alive with joy as friends and family gathered to celebrate. Adebi was stunning in her white gown, her happiness lighting up the atmosphere. Her mother fixed her veil, tears of joy in her eyes. You're beautiful, my daughter, she said. Today is your day. Outside, the car decorated with flowers and ribbons was ready to take Adebi to the church. The crowd gathered to cheer her on. Chimamanda stood by the door, her face unreadable. Underneath her wrapper, she clutched the bottle of acid tightly. Her heart was pounding as she watched Adebi wave to the guests and make her way toward the car. As the driver opened the door, Adebi lifted her dress to step in. Chimamanda moved quickly, stepping forward and uncapping the bottle in one swift motion. Without a word, she splashed the acid on Adebi's back and arm. Adebi let out a piercing scream as the acid burned through her gown and skin. The crowd erupted in chaos, women crying out in shock while the men rushed forward to help. Chimamanda stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she watched her sister collapse to the ground, writhing in pain. I can't take it anymore. Chimamanda suddenly shouted, her voice breaking through the panic. She's always been the perfect one. Always loved, always praised. And me? I'm nothing. Nothing. The crowd stared at her in disbelief, their anger and confusion growing. Chimamanda, what have you done? One of the elders demanded. This is your sister. Adebi, lying on the ground in agony, managed to lift her head. Why, Chimamanda, she sobbed. Why would you do this to me? Chimamanda's hands trembled as she dropped the empty bottle. Because I hate you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I've always hated you. The men quickly carried Adeobi into the car and sped off to the hospital. Chimamanda stood there, still and silent, as the crowd surrounded her. Some shouted at her, calling her heartless, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. At the hospital, doctors worked desperately to save Adeobi. The acid had caused severe burns, and she would need multiple surgeries. Chimamanda's parents were devastated, struggling to understand how their daughter could have done something so cruel. Back at home, Chimamanda locked herself in her room. Her mind raced with regret and anger. She felt empty, the satisfaction she thought she would feel replaced by a deep, gnawing guilt. She had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. At the hospital, when Adeobi woke up, her parents were by her side, tears streaming down their faces. Her back and arm were heavily bandaged, and the pain was unbearable. Where is Chimamanda? She asked weakly. Her mother shook her head, unable to speak. Adeobi closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Why would she hate me so much? She whispered. The silence in the house was suffocating after the chaos of the morning. Chimamanda remained locked in her room, her mind replaying the scene over and over again. She could still hear Adeobi's screams, the gasps of the crowd, and her mother's cries. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Adeobi lay in a sterile white bed, her body wrapped in bandages. The burns were severe, and the pain was unbearable. Her parents sat by her side, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. How could Chimamanda do this? Her father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, she said. We raised them to love each other. What did we do wrong? Adeobi opened her eyes slowly, her voice weak. It's not your fault, she said. Chimamanda, she was hurting. I didn't see it, but she was. Her mother held her hand tightly. Adeobi, you're so kind. Even now, you're thinking of her. But what she did is unforgivable. Chimamanda's guilt. Back at home, Chimamanda couldn't escape the whispers of the villagers. News of her actions had spread quickly, and everyone had an opinion. She's evil, some said. How can a sister do such a thing? Others simply shook their heads in pity. She was consumed by jealousy, they murmured. It destroyed her. Chimamanda's guilt ate away at her. She hadn't left her room since the incident, afraid to face her family or the outside world. The faces of the people she loved haunted her, her mother's tears, her father's anger, Adeobi's pain. She had thought hurting Adeobi would make her feel better, but it had only made her feel worse. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, she stepped out of her room. Her parents were sitting in the living room, their faces tired and drawn. They looked up when they saw her, and her mother's expression turned cold. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her father said, his voice trembling with anger. You've disgraced this family. You've hurt your sister in a way that can never be undone. I'm sorry, Chimamanda whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean. Don't you dare say you didn't mean it, her mother shouted, standing up. You meant every bit of it. You planned it, Chimamanda. You carried it out. Chimamanda fell to her knees, sobbing. I was jealous, she admitted. I hated how everyone loved Adeobi. I hated living in her shadow. But now, I hate myself. Her father turned away, unable to look at her. Her mother's voice softened slightly, but her eyes were still hard. You've done something terrible, Chimamanda. Sorry won't fix this. Only God can forgive you now. Days turned into weeks, and Adeobi slowly began to recover. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional pain was even worse. She couldn't understand why her sister, the person she had loved and trusted the most, had done this to her. One afternoon, as she lay in her hospital bed, Chimamanda walked in. Her steps were hesitant, her head bowed. Adeabi looked up, her expression unreadable. "I don't even know if I have the right to be here," Chimamanda began, her voice trembling. "But I needed to see you. I needed to say I'm sorry." Adeabi didn't respond immediately. She studied her sister, the guilt and regret evident in her eyes. Finally, she said, "Why, Chimamanda? Why did you hate me so much?" Chimamanda burst into tears. "I didn't hate you," she said. "I hated how you made me feel about myself. I was jealous of you, of how everyone loved you, how everything seemed to come so easily to you. I let that jealousy control me, and now I've destroyed everything." Adeabi's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't need to feel that way," she said. "I would have shared everything with you if only you'd asked. You're my sister, Chimamanda. I loved you. I still do." Chimamanda dropped to her knees beside Adeabi's bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "I don't deserve anything." Moving forward, Adeabi sighed deeply. "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve," she said. "It's about letting go of the pain so we can both move forward. I forgive you, Chimamanda. But you need to forgive yourself." Chimamanda nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small glimmer of hope. She knew it wouldn't be easy to repair the damage she had done, but she was determined to try. Jealousy is a powerful emotion, but so is love. Chimamanda's story is a reminder of the dangers of letting envy take root in our hearts. But it's also a story of redemption, a story of how love and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. Moral lesson: not everyone will celebrate your successes, even those closest to you. Sometimes, jealousy can brew in the hearts of those you least expect, even family. It's wise to guard your good news and share it only with those you trust completely. Jealousy is a dangerous emotion, and not everyone will have your best interest at heart, even your own blood.